The Kravish hunting pack moved through the dense forest of Theta 7 with deadly precision. Their thick fur rippled with each calculated step, and their 6 legs carried them silently across the alien soil. The Alpha, a massive creature named Vorkith, stood nearly 3 meters tall at the shoulder. His silver-streaked mane marked him as the eldest and wisest of his kind. Behind him, 12 warriors followed in tight formation, their yellow eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of danger. They had traveled across 3 star systems to reach this remote world. The humans had taken something precious from them, and the Kravish did not forgive such transgressions. 2 months ago, a human expedition had raided their breeding grounds on the planet Kesh Prime. The attack had been brutal and swift. When the Kravish warriors returned from their hunt, they found their nesting caves destroyed and 17 cubs missing. The Galactic Council had refused to intervene. Humans, they said, were protected under the Terran Alliance Charter. The Kravish could not simply declare war on an entire species over one incident. But Vorkith knew the old ways. Before councils and treaties, before space travel and diplomatic channels, there was only the law of tooth and claw. Someone had stolen their young, and that crime demanded blood. The tracking had taken weeks. The human ship had tried to cover its trail, but nothing could hide from a Kravish tracker once they caught the scent. The trail led them to this backwater planet, a world barely registered in the galactic database. A place where humans set up their illegal operations far from the eyes of their own government. Vorkith raised his massive paw, and the pack halted instantly. His nostrils flared as he tested the air. The scent was strong here. Human scent, mixed with something else. Something that made the fur along his spine rise with ancient recognition. The smell of his cubs was faint but unmistakable. The forest around them was strange. The trees had purple bark and leaves that hummed with a low vibration. Small creatures scattered at their approach, and the air was thick with moisture. This was not a pleasant world. The gravity was heavier than Kesh Prime, and the atmosphere had a bitter taste that made breathing uncomfortable. But discomfort meant nothing to warriors on a mission of vengeance. Through the trees ahead, Vorkith spotted structures. They were crude buildings, clearly temporary. The humans had set up some kind of camp. There were 5 main buildings arranged in a rough circle, with a larger structure in the center. Lights blazed from windows, and he could hear the rumble of human machines. The pack crouched low, observing. Vorkith's second, a warrior named Thrak, moved beside him. Thrak was younger, but nearly as large, his black fur making him almost invisible in the shadows. He growled softly, a sound that translated to a question in their language. How many? Vorkith extended his senses. His species had evolved as apex predators. They could feel the bioelectric signatures of living things, sense the heat of bodies through walls. He counted carefully. 10 humans, maybe 12, all adults. And somewhere in that central building, the familiar pulse of Kravish life. His cubs were there. The rage that filled him was cold and controlled. Vorkith had lived for 70 seasons. He had led his pack through countless hunts and 3 territorial wars. He knew that fury without discipline led to death. They would strike at dawn when the humans were sluggish and unprepared. They would hit hard and fast, eliminating any resistance before securing the cubs. Then they would burn this place to ash and return home. He signaled the pack to fall back and establish a perimeter. They would watch through the night, learn the patterns of the camp, identify weak points. As the warriors dispersed into the darkness, Vorkith remained, his eyes fixed on the central building. Soon, he thought, soon his cubs would be safe, and these humans would understand the cost of their actions. The night passed slowly. Vorkith did not sleep. He watched as humans moved between buildings, observed their routines. They were relaxed, careless. They did not post proper sentries. They did not scan the perimeter. These are not soldiers. They were criminals, smugglers perhaps, or black market traders. It made sense. Stealing cubs to sell to collectors or laboratories. The practice was ancient and evil, but humans had proven themselves capable of any atrocity for profit. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the purple canopy, Vorkith gathered his pack. They formed up in attack positions, each warrior knowing their role without need for words. They had trained for this. Every Kravish learned combat from the moment they could walk. It was their way. Vorkith prepared to give the signal. His muscles coiled like springs. His claws extended, each one as long as a human forearm and sharp enough to cut through steel. This was what he was born for. This was the purpose of an alpha: to protect, to avenge, to ensure the survival of his pack. But then something happened that stopped him cold. A door opened in the central building. A human emerged, and Vorkith's breath caught in his throat. The human was carrying something. No, not something. Someone. A Kravish cub. The human was a female, small by human standards. She wore simple clothing, a jacket, and pants that had seen better days. Her hair was tied back, and her face showed the lines of exhaustion. But what froze Vorkith was not the human. It was the cub. The little one was nestled against the human's chest, wrapped in a soft blanket. Its eyes were closed, and it made the small chirping sounds that Kravish cubs made when they felt safe and content. The human was speaking to it softly, words that Vorkith could not understand but recognized the tone of. Comfort, care, affection. The human sat down on the steps of the building. Dawn light washed over them both. She adjusted the blanket, making sure the cub was warm. Then she produced a bottle and began to feed it. The cub accepted the food eagerly, its tiny paws clutching at the bottle. Vorkith felt his world tilt. This made no sense. Stolen cubs were kept in cages, sedated or restrained. They were cargo, merchandise. They were not fed with care or wrapped in blankets. They were not held with gentleness. Another human emerged from the building, a male. He carried 2 more cubs. These ones were awake and playful, tumbling over each other in his arms. The male laughed as one of them tried to climb onto his head. He set them down carefully on the ground, and they immediately began to wrestle with each other, the way healthy cubs did. More humans came out. Each one tended to cubs. Some were feeding them. Others were playing with them, tossing small balls that the cubs chased with delight. One human was examining a cub's paw with careful attention, treating a small wound with obvious medical skill. Thrak moved beside Vorkith again, confusion radiating from him. The entire pack was frozen, watching a scene that defied everything they had expected to find. The female human stood and carried her cub across the clearing. She entered another building, and through the open door, Vorkith could see inside. There were nests, proper Kravish nests, built with the traditional materials and arranged correctly. There were heating lamps to maintain proper temperature. There were toys scattered around, the kind that Kravish cubs needed for their development. There were medical supplies organized on shelves. This was not a smuggling operation. This was something else entirely. Vorkith's mind raced. He had come here for vengeance. He had come to kill humans and rescue his cubs from torture and captivity. But the cubs were not in cages. They were not suffering. They looked healthy. They looked happy. One of the cubs broke free from a human and came running toward the tree line. It was one of the older ones, perhaps 4 months old, and it had caught an interesting scent. The cub moved with the awkward gait of youth, all enthusiasm and no coordination. It was heading directly toward where Vorkith crouched in concealment. A human called out, concerned. The female who had been feeding the youngest cub set down her charge and moved quickly after the wandering one. She was fast for a human, and she caught the cub before it reached the forest edge. She scooped it up, and the cub chirped in protest, wriggling in her arms. The human held the cub close, speaking softly. Slowly the cub calmed. It nuzzled against her neck, making the affection sounds that Kravish cubs made with their mothers. The human carried it back to the clearing, running her hand along its fur in the soothing pattern that every Kravish knew instinctively. Vorkith felt something crack inside his chest. This human knew how to calm a cub. She knew the right touches, the right sounds. That knowledge did not come from holding a sedated animal in a cage. It came from spending time with cubs, from caring for them day after day, from learning their needs and responding to them. The sun rose higher, and the camp came fully to life. Vorkith watched as the humans went through their morning routine. They fed every cub. They checked each one for signs of illness or injury. They cleaned the nesting areas. They played with the young ones, giving them the stimulation and attention that growing cubs required. One human brought out a large container and began distributing food to the others. They ate quickly, talking among themselves. Their body language was not that of criminals. There was no tension, no wariness. They seemed tired but content. They worked together with the ease of people who had been doing this for a long time. As the morning progressed, Vorkith began to notice other details. The buildings were weathered but well-maintained. There were solar panels providing power. There was a water collection system. This was not a temporary camp. This was a permanent facility, built with care and intended to last. Near one building, he spotted something that made his blood run cold. It was a grave marker, a simple stone with writing on it. Human writing, which he could not read, but the meaning was clear. Someone had died here. Someone these humans had cared enough about to bury and remember. The realization came to him slowly, like dawn breaking over a dark landscape. These humans had not stolen his cubs. They had saved them. The memory came back to him with crushing clarity. The attack on Kesh Prime 2 months ago. The explosions in the nesting caves. The Kravish had assumed it was humans raiding for cubs. But what if they had been wrong? What if the attack had been something else entirely? Kesh Prime was in disputed territory. There were other species who coveted their world. The Vraxians had been making territorial claims for years. They had technology. They had weapons. And they had no love for the Kravish. What if the attack had been Vraxian? What if these humans had arrived afterward and found cubs in the wreckage? Kravish cubs without parents, injured and alone. What would humans do with such a discovery? Vorkith knew what most species would do. They would leave them to die. Cubs were dangerous, after all. Adult Kravish were feared throughout the galaxy as fierce warriors. Even the cubs had claws and teeth. Any rational being would walk away from such a liability. But these humans had not walked away. They had gathered up the cubs. They had brought them here to this secret place. They had built nests and bought food and medical supplies. They had spent months caring for them, keeping them safe, helping them grow strong. Why? The question burned in Vorkith's mind. Humans and Kravish had no history of friendship. They barely had diplomatic relations. The two species existed in different parts of the galaxy and had little reason to interact. These humans had nothing to gain from saving Kravish cubs. In fact, they had everything to lose. Hiding 17 cubs was expensive and dangerous. If their own government discovered what they were doing, they would face serious legal trouble. Yet here they were, day after day, doing the hard work of raising children that were not even their species. Throck touched his shoulder gently. The question was silent, but clear. What do we do now? Vorkith did not know. He had come here for war. He had come to rain death upon those who had wronged his pack. But the people in this clearing had not wronged anyone. They had performed an act of mercy, maybe the greatest act of mercy Vorkith had ever witnessed. The day wore on, and the pack remained hidden, watching. Vorkith needed to understand. He needed to see more before he made any decision. His warriors were confused and restless, but they trusted their alpha. They would wait as long as he commanded. In the afternoon, one of the cubs fell ill. It was one of the smaller ones, barely 2 months old. It began to make distress calls, the high-pitched sounds that indicated pain or fear. Immediately, 3 humans converged on it. The female who seemed to be in charge examined the cub carefully. She spoke rapid words to the others, and they moved with practiced efficiency. They brought the sick cub inside the central building. Through the window, Vorkith watched as they laid it on a table and began to treat it. They had medical equipment, good equipment. The female worked with steady hands, administering medicines, checking vital signs. The other humans assisted her, holding the cub still when necessary, comforting it when the procedures caused discomfort. It took hours. The sun moved across the sky. The other cubs were settled into their nests for afternoon rest. But the humans did not rest. They stayed with the sick cub, monitoring it constantly, adjusting treatments, refusing to give up. As evening approached, the cub's distress calls finally quieted. Whatever illness had struck, it was passing. The little one curled up in a nest, exhausted but stable. The female human sat beside it, one hand resting gently on its side, feeling each breath. She looked completely drained. But when the cub opened its eyes and chirped softly at her, she smiled. It was a smile of pure relief and joy. Vorkith felt his last reservations crumble. These humans loved his cubs, not as property, not as exotic creatures to profit from. They loved them as children deserving of care and protection. He stood slowly, rising from concealment. The pack stirred behind him, uncertain. Vorkith raised his head and walked forward out of the forest and into the clearing. The response was immediate. One of the humans spotted him and shouted. The others turned, and Vorkith saw their faces go pale with terror. They knew what a Kravish was. They knew what was standing before them. Weapons appeared. Humans ran for the buildings. One grabbed a rifle and aimed it at Vorkith with shaking hands. The others moved to shield the cubs, placing their own bodies between the young ones and the perceived threat. Vorkith took another step forward. 12 more Kravish emerged from the forest behind him, and the humans' terror doubled. They were surrounded by the most dangerous predators in the known galaxy, and they had no hope of survival. But they did not run. Every human stayed in position, protecting the cubs. Even the one with the rifle, whose hand shook so badly he could barely hold it, stood his ground. The female came out of the central building. She took in the scene with wide eyes. Then she walked directly toward Vorkith. Others called to her, trying to pull her back, but she shook them off. She walked across that clearing with her back straight and her head high until she stood less than